I started working as a DoorDash driver on weekend nights to make a little extra cash while saving up for rent. Friday and Saturday nights were always the most lucrative because everyone was either staying up late drinking with friends or ordering late-night comfort food. It was a chilly Saturday night in mid-November, right around 1 a.m., when my phone buzzed with an order. It was a simple pickup from a 24-hour McDonald's for a guy named Tyler. The McDonald's was only 2 minutes away. I pulled into the drive-thru, grabbed the bag, just 2 double cheeseburgers and a large fry, and plugged Tyler's address into the GPS. He lived about 6 or 7 minutes away down a stretch of dark, winding back roads. The app guided me down a narrow asphalt road that ended abruptly, forcing me onto a tiny, unlit gravel dead-end street tucked right against a thick patch of woods bordering the interstate. The house was at the very end of the street, a dilapidated 2-story house with overgrown weeds pushing through the driveway cracks. I parked at the curb. The entire house was pitch black, except for a tiny amber glow coming from a window near the front door. I didn't want to go ringing doorbells at 1:15 in the morning, so I tried calling his number. It rang once and went straight to voicemail. I hung up, and almost instantly my phone chimed with a text from the app. "Bring it up to the back deck. Door is unlocked." A little strange, but not the weirdest request I'd had. I grabbed the brown paper bag, got out of my car, and walked up the creaky wooden steps onto the side porch. Before I could even knock, the heavy wooden door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was a guy in his mid-30s. He was tall, completely bald, and wearing a stained, sleeveless undershirt. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and sunken. When he opened his mouth to speak, the smell of stale alcohol and something heavy and metallic practically knocked me over.
"Tyler?" I asked, holding out the bag. "Yeah. Hey, man, do me a favor," he said. His voice was low, slurred, and raspy. "Step inside and put it on the kitchen island. My hands are dirty. I'll run down to the basement and grab you a $20 cash tip." Now, normally, I don't enter people's houses, but a $20 tip on a $6 McDonald's order? I hesitated, but agreed. I stepped into the kitchen. It was barely lit by a tiny plug-in nightlight near the floor. The air inside was thick and suffocatingly warm. The smell I noticed on the porch was 10 times worse in here. It smelled like rotting garbage mixed with copper. "Be right back," muttered Tyler, disappearing down a narrow door that led into the basement. I heard his heavy boots going down the wooden stairs. I placed the bag on the counter. Minutes started ticking by. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. He was taking an uncomfortably long time down there. Restless and increasingly uneasy, I stepped out of the kitchen into the adjacent living room. The only light came from a muted TV screen flickering gray light across the walls. The stench in this room was unbearable. That was when I noticed the sliding glass back door leading out to the rear deck was propped open a few inches. Thinking the smell was just old trash and wanting a breath of cold air, I walked over and stepped out onto the back deck. The moment I stepped outside, the loud, aggressive buzzing of dozens of flies filled my ears. Before I could process the sound, a motion sensor security light snapped on, flooding the deck with harsh white light. Right there, resting against the deck railing, were 2 heavy-duty black contractor bags. They were tied tightly at the top, but the outlines were unmistakably rigid and human-shaped. A thick, dark puddle was slowly pooling underneath them on the wooden planks. My blood ran cold. The $20 tip didn't matter anymore. I turned around and practically threw myself back into the house, racing toward the front door. But just as my hand touched the brass doorknob, the basement door burst open. Tyler stepped out into the kitchen, holding 3 crumpled $1 bills in his hand. He stopped dead when he saw me standing at the exit, my hand on the knob. "Where are you going?" he asked, His voice wasn't slurred anymore. It was sharp, cold. My heart was hammering in my throat. I just thought I heard someone near my car, I lied, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Just checking. He stared at me for 3 agonizing seconds. Then his eyes drifted toward the sliding back door, where the bright motion light was still casting a beam into the living room. His face completely shifted. The fake smile dropped. "Did you go out on my deck?" he asked softly. "No," I lied instantly. "No, I stayed right here." Without a word, he took a step toward me and reached out, his hand gripping my shoulder with incredible force. "Hey!" I yelled, yanking my shoulder free with all my strength. I yanked the front door open, sprinted down the porch steps, and practically threw myself into the driver's seat of my car. I hit the lock button and shoved the key into the ignition. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely turn the key. I glanced up at his front porch in the rearview mirror. Tyler was sprinting straight down the driveway toward my driver's side window, wielding a long, heavy steel crowbar. I slammed my foot on the gas, fishtailing wildly onto the main road. I didn't stop driving until I was 2 miles down the highway, where I pulled over and dialed 911. Within 3 minutes, 3 Claremont County Sheriff cruisers flew past me with their sirens blaring. I followed at a distance. When police surrounded the house, they caught Tyler in the middle of dragging those black contractor bags toward the woods behind his lot. The bags contained the remains of his landlord. If I had stayed in that kitchen 30 seconds longer, I know I would have been in a 3rd bag.
Story 2. The Arm on the Landing. I used to work for a local Asian family-owned restaurant in Canton, Georgia. It was a great high school job because the pay was decent, but more importantly, the tips were always solid. My friend Marcus worked the front counter, taking phone orders, while I handled all the deliveries in my beat-up sedan. It was a rainy Tuesday night around 8:30 p.m. Marcus handed me a brown paper bag with a large order of fried rice and spring rolls, along with a ticket listing an address on the outskirts of town. I drove down a long, rural road until my GPS told me to turn onto a long, unpaved dirt driveway. The driveway wound through thick pine trees before opening up into a dark, overgrown clearing. Sitting in the middle of the clearing was a faded, dilapidated 2-story Victorian-style house. The lawn was covered in waist-high weeds, the porch railings were rotting, and there wasn't a single light on in any of the windows. It looked completely abandoned. I called Marcus back at the shop to double-check the address. "Hey Marcus, are you sure this is right? This place looks totally abandoned," I said into the speaker. A second later, our boss grabbed the phone. He was a strict, no-nonsense guy. "Look at the ticket. The customer paid cash. Go knock on the door and don't bring my food back cold." I sighed, hung up, and grabbed the bag. The wet grass rubbed against my shins as I pushed through the overgrown yard. I climbed the rickety wooden steps to the front door. There was no doorbell, and the door handle was completely missing, just a dark, empty hole in the wood where the lock used to be. I knocked heavily 3 times. I waited 30 seconds. Nothing. No sound, no footsteps, no lights turning on. Feeling stupid, I turned around, walked back to my car, sat down, and pulled out my phone to text Marcus that the place was empty. But as I looked up at the house through my rain-streaked windshield, a light suddenly clicked on in one of the second-floor windows. Figuring the customer was just slow, I walked back up to the front porch and raised my hand to knock again, but before my knuckles touched the wood, the door slowly drifted open a few inches on its own.
Nobody was standing behind it. "Hello?" I called out, pushing the door open a bit wider. "DoorDash delivery?" My voice echoed through a hollow, dark hallway. The interior smelled like damp drywall, mildew, and age. "Hello?" I called again. From the top of the dark staircase in the center of the hall, a voice rasped back. "Up here." It was a strange, wheezing voice, pitched low and unnaturally slow. I stepped onto the first wooden step of the staircase. "I've got your food," I said, holding the bag up toward the dark second-floor landing. "Can you come down?" Instead of footsteps, an arm reached out from the darkness at the top of the second-floor landing. The arm was pale, covered in dirt, and wearing a torn, dark sleeve. "Look, man, I'm not coming up there. You need to come down here with the cash or I'm leaving." The arm paused mid-wave. Then, slowly, it pulled back into the complete darkness of the second-floor hallway. Before I could turn around, something heavy shot down through the darkness and slammed directly into my chest, knocking me backward onto the porch. I scrambled to my feet, gasping, looking down at what had just hit me. It wasn't a prop, it wasn't a plastic Halloween prank. Lying on the dirty floorboards right next to my delivery bag was a severed human forearm, pale, cold, and freshly torn at the elbow. I didn't scream. I didn't even drop the food bag. I just sprinted blindly down the porch steps, threw myself into my car, and drove like a maniac to the nearest lit house a quarter-mile down the road. I pounded on the front door of a suburban house until an elderly man opened it. I was hyperventilating, barely able to form words, as I begged him to call the police. When the Cherokee County deputies arrived and searched the abandoned property, they found that the house had been squatted in for months by a wanted fugitive. In the upstairs bedroom, officers discovered a scene so horrific it made national local news, and the severed arm had belonged to a missing hiker reported 3 days prior. I handed my boss my resignation notice the very next morning.
Story 3. The Spike Strip on Crocker Road. When I was 19, I took a gap year before college and picked up a job as a delivery driver for a Domino's Pizza in Manchester Township, New Jersey. If you know anything about Ocean County, you know it's surrounded by miles of dense pine forests known as the Pine Barrens. At night, once you get off the main highways, there are no streetlights, just endless dirt roads cut through towering trees. On weekends, our shop stayed open until 3 a.m. On this particular Saturday night, it was around 2:15 a.m. when a late order came in. Our head cook that night was a guy named Dave, 28, permanently stressed, and always in a terrible mood. He slapped 2 pizza boxes onto the counter and gave me the delivery slip. "Crocker Road," Dave growled. "Take it and hurry back so we can close." I hopped into my beat-up 2002 Honda Civic and drove out toward the address. After 10 minutes of driving down Route 539, I turned off the pavement onto Crocker Road, a narrow, unpaved dirt path that sloped deep into the trees. My headlights were the only source of light for miles. I was going about 20 miles an hour when suddenly a loud, violent popping sound echoed through the floorboards, and my steering wheel violently yanked to the right. The unmistakable rhythmic flop, flop, flop of a blown tire filled the cabin. I hit the brakes and pulled over onto the dirt shoulder. I got out with my phone flashlight and checked my front right tire. It was completely shredded, sitting flat against the rim. Looking down the road, I realized the house I was delivering to was only 50 yards away. I could see warm lights glowing through the trees. Thinking it would be faster to deliver the food first and ask the homeowner if I could use a jack, I grabbed the pizza bag and walked up the long driveway. I rang the bell. Almost instantly, the front door opened. Standing there was a young guy in his late 20s, wearing a plain gray hoodie and jeans. He looked totally normal. "Hey, man," I said, handing over the hot bag. "Here's your order.
Listen, I actually just blew a tire right at the entrance of your driveway. You wouldn't happen to have a portable air pump or a heavy jack, would you?" The guy's expression changed. His eyes widened slightly, and a subtle, strange grin spread across his face. "Oh, man, that sucks," he said slowly, handing me a $20 bill. "Yeah, I've got heavy tools in my garage. Walk back down to your car, and I'll grab my gear and meet you down there." "Thanks a lot, man," I said, turning to walk back. As I walked back down his dirt driveway toward my idling Civic, I kept my phone flashlight pointed at the ground to see what could have caused such a massive blowout. 10 feet from the main road, my light caught something metallic buried under a layer of pine needles. I leaned down. It was a homemade spike strip, a 2-foot wooden plank driven full of 4-inch rusted steel framing nails, painted black to blend into the dirt. My heart plummeted into my stomach. That spike strip wasn't an accident. It was intentionally built and hidden right at the entrance of his private road. I heard footsteps crunching behind me. I quickly straightened up, pretending I hadn't seen anything, and turned around. The guy was walking down the driveway toward me, holding a long, heavy iron lug wrench in his right hand. "Find what you hit?" he asked, his voice entirely flat. "No," I lied, keeping my voice as calm as humanly possible. "Must have been a sharp rock. Hey, you know what? I'm just going to call AAA. You don't need to worry about it." He stopped 5 feet away from me, staring intensely at my face. "It's no trouble," he whispered, lifting the iron wrench slightly. "Let me help you." "Gotta get back to the shop," I said, stepping backward toward my driver's door. I threw the door open, dove inside, locked it, and shoved the transmission into reverse. I carefully steered around the hidden spike strip and backed out onto the paved road. Through my windshield, I saw the guy drop the wrench and start sprinting at full speed down the driveway straight toward my car. I threw the car into drive and floored it. Because I was driving on a completely bare metal rim, I couldn't go faster than 15 miles an hour without losing control. In my side mirror, I could see him running behind my car in the dark, keeping pace for nearly 200 yards before he finally gave up and faded into the night. It took me 20 agonizing minutes to limp my car back to the Domino's parking lot, the rim grinding and sparking the entire way. When I pulled in, Dave and the counter girl rushed outside, shocked at the state of my car. I told them everything. Dave immediately called the Manchester Township Police Department. An hour later, while I was waiting for my shift to end, a police cruiser pulled up to take my statement. The officer told me they sent 2 units to Crocker Road, but the house was completely empty, the lights were turned off, and the homemade spike strip had been removed. I quit Domino's 2 weeks later. To this day, whenever I drive down an unlit rural road at night, I keep my eyes glued to the pavement.